Hello students and welcome to your advanced JavaScript lecture. Now, seems like quite a few of you have gotten to a point where you've been able to complete at least the majority of the basic JavaScript sprint, and some of you have already moved on to the advanced JavaScript lab. So we're excited that we have a wide variety of students, and that's just going to sort of be how the course is going to be run. We're going to have a wide variety of students that are all going to be able to learn something. And whether you came in from 0, you're making your way up to 100, or you came at 25 and you're making your way up to 100, the goal is to provide a platform so that you can all get to that working developer space. So today we're going to be going over a few fun things that I really like to talk about and I think are really enjoyable. And a lot of people in whatever other programming language may come to JavaScript and they look at and they may scratch their head with these concepts, okay? So some of the things that I want to talk about is this. Well, first off, let's get talking about the keyword this. So this is a reserved keyword in JavaScript. If you type it in your text editor and hover over it, you can see that there's it's a keyword, it's reserved, it gives us some annotations about it. So you can think of this as the same type of thing it is referred to in English, English, the language. So if you are invited over to a friend's house and your friend is throwing you a dinner party, and you're there amongst your friends, and you're playing maybe some Settlers of Catan while the food is being prepared. There's some nice appetizers out on the table, and some lovely background jazz music playing from the Amazon Echo in the corner. And all of a sudden, your friend turns to you and says, "Hey Ryan, I don't like this." Now, with everything that's going on, how am I, Ryan, going to be able to determine what it is that my friend does not like? Well, you could start by asking a few questions to get your friend to be more specific. This concept applies to the this keyword in the sense that this is used to point at certain things based on a specific given context. And I'm going to show you exactly what that means with going over 4 different rules of this keyword. So the 4 rules for, let's give it some quotes, this. All right. So rule number 1, I've gone and copied and pasted these in some notes so we can go over them piece by piece and go over examples. So the first rule is, I'm going to just minimize my screen a little bit. Whenever a function is contained in the global scope, the value of this inside of that function will be the window object. What on earth does that mean? Okay, let's talk about scope. All right, so I'm going to pull up my terminal, and I'm actually going to give a console.log right here and say, and I'm going to label it. I'm going to do this with single quotes because we're not heathens, right? This, and I just want to see this. All right, now you can see I'm already getting some hints right here as to what it is from a plugin that I have called Quokka. But you can see right away that this is already attached to an object. And that object is called console, okay? And that's because this is using Node. This package that I'm using right here is using Node under the hood. And Node is just JavaScript on the server, okay? So you can see that there's a lot of cool things attached to this global object. But some of those things you may already be familiar with. Maybe if we get down to the very bottom and we look at, so there's a lot of Wallaby stuff thrown in here because of the package that I'm using. Wallaby is the company that built Quokka. Okay, so what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to actually use Node manually over this file and just say node over app.js, and let's see what is going on. I wanted to execute this, so if maybe it doesn't want me to do it. So it doesn't like me doing that. It's giving it to us here, but let's look at our well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try and see if I can just force this to point to that global object, and then we can output it from within a function. And that might give us a little bit more opportunity to see what's going on. So let's create ourselves a function, and I'm going to use the function keyword here for these examples, okay? And the reason is because we're using this, all right? This doesn't really operate the same way within our Lambda function syntax, all right? So if you had an anonymous function here, there is no this style programming with Lambda functions. So there's benefits and drawbacks to pretending that this Lambda function is you should never say lambdas are the new function keywords. That's just simply not true. They're different. They behave differently. So I'm going to give this function here a name. I'm going to pass it a name when it comes in. I'm going to call it greet. Okay, and so when I log this function, so I'm going to log greet, and I'm going to pass it greet, and just label it so that we know what it is. Okay, so this is just saying it's an anonymous empty function right now. It's not really doing anything for us. But we're going to log the call to greet with a name of Ryan. Okay, so greet's now going to be initialized with the Ryan string as the name parameter. We're passing Ryan as an argument to greet, and we're calling it with console log. Okay, so now we're going to do something with that. I want to say, in here, I'm just going to simply console.log, and I'm going to use string interpolation here and say, or the string, template string style programming. And I'm going to say, hello there, Mr. Ryan. Right? So now, as this log hits, we have a hello Ryan that prints out. And I'm also going to console.log this context of the keyword this. And you can see it's the same thing that we just don't have a label here. So if I labeled it and said this, this is gonna just help you see this point through. If we hover over it, you can see that we get this out of this keyword. Okay, so this is pointing to our console, our global console object. Okay, and if I were to do the same thing down here and just say instead of that, we're going to put this, you're going to see that they are the exact same thing in this context because they're both pointing to this same object. Okay, so if I why is it saying greet is undefined? I'm not logging greet. That's weird. Console.log this and pass it this. There we go. All right. So you can see this is pointing to the global object, lowercase this that we've labeled here, this console log statement, and the same thing within here. And that's because we've provided a closure with greet. Okay. So now I'm gonna talk a little bit about this idea of closure. All right. So when we get to this line, after we execute this function, and we're executing it by passing whatever gets returned out of it or whatever executes within the function to our console log, so we can see it up here, right? So now we can see it gets to line 5 and it says hello Ryan. It gets to line 6 and it's like we have this. This inside of here is not defined. There is nothing called this. And so what it does is it uses this concept of closure to reach outside to the outer scope. And JavaScript knows how to do this. So I'm just going to pull up my little annotator tool here. Let me maximize my window for full effect. And I'm going to just draw on my screen for you. So when we hit line 6 here, it's like, I don't know what this is. So whoever executed this function doesn't know what they're doing. But this isn't defined here. So what it's going to do is it's actually going to step outside the scope of this function and look for it in the next defined scope. So we have, and we'll just represent this with a $sign. That may be confusing to some of you who've come from jQuery, but don't worry about it. It's just our version of $sign here for this tutorial. This is going to step outside of the function greet, and it's going to say, hey, global scope, object in which all of my code exists in, because all of our code has to exist within at least the global JavaScript object. And it's going to look for it there. It's going to find it there because it automatically exists. And it's going to use that. And that's why these two functions are bound, or these two this keywords are bound to the same object in memory, okay? So this console, dtrace net server connection, global process, blah, blah, blah. It's going to be look and feel exactly the same here. This is no different than the concept that runs within our browser. I'm showing you this in the Node context, but if I were to pull open a Chrome browser, web browser, and get our Google Chrome up and running, I can show you the same exact thing from within the console. Okay, so all I did was hit Command Option J on my Mac, and it opened up our JavaScript DevTools console here. So now I can clear this out and I can look at this. And look, it's named a little differently. It's not named, what is it named in Node land? They call it console. They call it window in the browser. And it's going to look and feel very familiar, very much the same window object. Now Node is going to be using it in a much different context, so you don't need to worry too much about it. So the reason that this is defined and set to the window object is because of our very first rule of the keyword this. Whenever a function is contained in the global scope, the value of this inside of that function will be the window. Our function greet is determined right here. We're going to put this in Chrome and show you the same example of this in just a second in that context. And because this is not defined explicitly inside of greet, it's going to reach outside up to the global scope and grab greet, or this from up there. And if I were to do that down here, we would get this same, I'm going to have to call greet now. Greet, and just pass it. Oh, look at that little snippet. And this is pointing to the same this right here on the very first line in this window. Okay, so that should be pretty straightforward. I won't go into any more depth on that first rule for now. We're going to move right on to our second rule of the keyword this, which brings us to some other fun things today. So the second rule for the keyword this is whenever a function is called by a preceding dot, the object before the dot is this. And what on earth could that possibly mean? All right. Well, we can look at an array, simple array in JavaScript, 1, 2, 3, and say dot now. Okay, so we can assume by our definition that our array is pointing to, or so that our this keyword is actually pointing to, so it's not actually pointing to that. So that is a terrible example. We're going to move forward. We're going to look at a better example real quick. And that example, coming up with it, will be, okay, let's point it to like an object, okay, and then give that object a method that we can then point to and refer to. And so if I had done that a little differently, I may have been able to show you a better example. But this will get the point across. So if I say const me equals an object, and I'm me, okay, and I just have a name that's, I don't know, so name, Ryan, right? And we'll say that that name, this object also has a say hello, or let's call it introduce function. That function is a method because it's bound to the scope of this object, and that's going to take our name that we pass it in and console log out. Oh yeah, this is an object, so I don't need a semicolon there. And it's just going to console.log this dot, oh no, let's do this. Let's say, hello, my name is Ryan. Actually, this needs to be, not Ryan. This needs to be the name that's given, okay? And then we'll say console.log the keyword this. All right. So whenever a function is called by a preceding dot, so whenever a function gets called by the preceding dot, then whenever then the object before the dot is this. All right. So remember, this is pointing to an object. In this case, we can hopefully assume that the object is me. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to change this up a little bit. And I'm going to say, to make this a little more dynamic, I'm going to say, I'm going to give this two variables. The first one is going to be our greeting that is defined up, up here. And I'm going to actually give it, so if I hover over this, it could be any at this point. But if I call this dot greeting and say greeting is going to be hello, my name is space at the end. And that should help us out here. So now if I call me dot introduce and pass it the name of Ryan, and that's, I got to do it the right way, otherwise. You can see that we're hitting this and console logging out my hello, my name is Ryan. If I were to full on execute this function, we're binding this greeting from here inside the scope of this introduce function. This is not defined with inside of this function until this function gets called and looks for this in the outer scope, which is going to be an object. You can see right here in the outer scope of this function within this me object, we're saying that this gets everything that's bound here. So anything that's on our greeting property will get logged out here. And then since I'm calling introduce by passing it Ryan, whatever I pass in here on line 21 is going to become this name. All right. So if I wanted to make this less dynamic and just simply call our function and not even worry about passing it anything, but I'm going to just hard code the name in here to Ryan, and I'm going to say this dot Ryan, just that name, I'm sorry, we get the same result. That's because this, when this function is called, is not necessarily explicitly defined in this introduce function scope. And so our program is going to look outside and find what it's bound to. So that's the name of the game there. That's our number 2 rule. Okay? Our number 3 rule is as follows. Whenever a constructor function is used, and we're going to go over those definitely in depth. Whenever a constructor function is used, this refers to the specific instance of the object that is created and returned by the constructor function itself. That is a very heavy, long definition. And since we're going into another screen, I'm just going to break the line there and leave it right here. So what I'm going to do is show you a couple of key principles here of object creation in JavaScript. This points to an object. It's always just going to point to an object. Okay, but this keyword will point to a specific object. So if you're using this style programming, you're going to need to be using the actual function keyword itself so it knows and creates that context of this. Okay? Once again, this points to an object. Did I mention that this points to an object yet? All right? It just depends on where and when you're calling that object based on these 4 rules as to what it is actually being assigned to or what it actually looks at and what specific directions you give it. So when we create a constructor function, let's do it by saying function person, okay, is a constructor. And a very common way to distinguish whether your function will be a constructor function is capitalizing it. That's just how we do things in JavaScript, okay? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pass this function some sort of options. Those options are going to be bound to this function object, and they're not going to be created yet, but we're going to create this object, this function constructor, this constructor function, in such a way that when it is called, these properties can be filled in, okay? So the first thing is going to be first, we'll just call it first name, since it's a person, they'll have a name. And that's going to be set equal to options.first name. Doing it explicitly right there. Okay? And we'll do the same thing with last name. And we'll do the same thing with we'll just use a very similar function to the one we did above. We'll say name. And that's going to be a function. So we want say name to be set equal to the function keyword. Once again, we're going to be using this, so we need the function keyword to be used. Okay, so now we get into this pattern, very similar to what we've been doing. And we're just going to simply console.log the keyword. We'll just say hello. We'll just have this here. We'll just say say name. We'll just say greet. I like greet better. Okay, so hello, my name is, and we'll get very specific as we get formal and introduce ourselves as our first and our last name. We're going to say this dot first name and this dot last name. Okay. So notice if I actually come down here and try and just call person, it's going to be like, I don't know what any of that is, dude. Like, you haven't given me any responsibility to it. You haven't assigned anything here. That's because this keyword is looking for specific property names on our options.firstName. Okay. So we're going to be setting whatever this dot first name and last name are to whatever options come in here. So let's call person, and let's give it a first name prop and call it Ryan. And then we'll give it a last name prop and call it Hamlin. Okay? So now when I come in here, I have access to, you can see that I'm not getting any errors. My screen, it's not logging or doing anything yet. But that's because all we've done is just simply created a single object called person. We actually didn't even create it. We just called our constructor function and given it these these properties here. So let's actually make this work now. And this is where we get into the topic of the keyword new. All right. So new is a keyword that we can use to essentially instantiate or create a new object. Okay. So we're going to use person to be sort of our placeholder object that's going to give the ability to pass down or delegate its properties to another object at another place in time. And the way that we do that is using the new keyword. So now if I say const Ryan equals new person, and I simply pass this stuff up to Ryan, okay, you can see if I were to log this out, we're going to get a person. So Ryan is a new person, okay? So we essentially created this reusable chunk of an object creator, all right? And then this first name comes in, and it's like we can bind ourselves to whatever is called here, okay? So whatever is passed here is an option. So this first name is going to be the options first name. And this last name is going to be the options last name. So now anytime we need to reuse this object, we can say, const Sean, we'll give it in the lowercase so he's just like me, equals new person, and give person this object of first name Sean, last name of, I believe I'm spelling this right, it's Chen. And so now if we were to console log Sean out, very, very straightforward here. We have two completely separate objects, all right? And they're called Ryan and Sean. So where does this keyword come in this case? Well, I can tell you that this keyword comes in at this point when we're referring to the specific instance in which person is getting called. So Ryan is setting up a new person. When this happens, this keyword gets bound to that options object there. So if I were to console.log this, in both instances, person, the first name is Ryan the first time, the second is Hamlin, or sorry, the last name is Hamlin, and then the second time it gets called, you can see this console log is getting called twice because we're calling it with the new keyword. So that's really as straightforward as it gets. This options object that comes in, that's bound now to this person stuff, is what is giving us our this. Okay, in the first instance, it's Ryan. In the second instance, it's Sean. So whenever a constructor function is used, this refers to the specific instance of the object that is created and returned by the constructor function itself. So now if I console log Ryan.greet and just call it, you can see, let's get rid of this console log here. You can see that we called it and it logged out, hello, my name is Ryan Hamblin. Okay? If I were to do the same thing with Sean, you would expect that it's going to do the same exact thing for Sean. Okay? Very friendly person creator. So now we have a reusable chunk of code called a constructor function that we can use to create new people over and over and over again. So as people sign up for our application, they can pass us a first and last name, and we can store that information from them in the database and create an instance of that person. All right? So, okay, so yeah, that is our fourth rule regarding constructor functions and the this keyword. All right, so now I'm going to move on to the fourth rule, which states, whenever JavaScript's call or apply method is used, this is explicitly defined. So now we have a couple of methods that we can use to explicitly define what the call or what the keyword this points to. And now this is very, very useful. Let's say that Sean and Ryan both suffer identity crises, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, let's see if I can come up with a good example of this. So I'm going to say, real quick, okay, so here's what I want to do. I want to try and swap Ryan and Sean's identity, okay? So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say Ryan.greet, and we'll see what happens with Ryan. But if I wanted to basically explicitly set what this dot first name and this dot last name are bound to in a different context, I could do so by calling this. So I could say something like .call and pass Ryan Sean's information. So now you can see I'm calling Ryan.greet, but I'm explicitly setting the values of first name and last name, and you can see up here it prints out as, hello, my name is Sean Chen, so I have suffered an identity crisis. All right, very pretty straightforward there. But now we can see the same exact type of behavior with Sean and say .greet and say apply. Now the only major difference between apply and call is you're using them to basically accomplish the same thing, explicitly set what this points to, right, based on this definition right here. So this will be explicitly set when I call it, but apply, and this is how I remember this. It starts with A, so it can actually take an array, a list of arguments that can be passed to it. And we'll get into a further example of using that second argument as an array. So just know that the definition of apply is a set of arguments can be passed to the function. And one of those arguments can simply be an array of arguments, okay? That's the only difference between call and apply. They both accomplish the same thing in that they reassign or explicitly set the this keyword, all right? Okay, so that's a really trivial example, but you can see up here we're calling Sean and he's outputting my name, and I am, we're calling Ryan and I am outputting Sean's name. So we've suffered our identity crisis, and now each person is frantically uninformed about who they are. Okay, so now I wanted to go down and start talking about this concept of closure, okay? Closure is something, it's a principle that's not isn't necessarily unique to JavaScript, but we use it in JavaScript all the time. So I want to make sure that we understand that this is not as complicated as every freaking example out there exists, okay? So I have a variable here, and let's say that that variable's name is just var name equals, and we're getting narcissistic, so we'll just say Ryan, okay? So now what I've done, I'm going to actually comment the rest of this stuff out so that we don't ruin the namespace or anything. So if I look at name, that simply gives me Ryan. Now what's going to happen if I actually wrap, this in a function and say that function is just going to be an anonymous function, and we say console.log name, okay? And I'm actually going to say name, that's our function, and we're going to print, or we're just going to call say name. Okay. So what on earth did we just witness? All right. Inside of this function, we have access to name. Okay. So here is our global scope object. Our function sayName got called. It's got a console log right here, and it's going to say, oh, name. Inside this function, name is not defined. Name is nothing in here, inside this scope. Okay, so we have two scopes that we're concerned with here. All right, so our outer scope, and then our lexical scope. Of this function calls environment. Okay, so our lexical scope is just saying like the scope within a function or an object or inside of something that's not an outer scope. So we call name, we look for it, and it's like, the name's not defined. So it's going to go up the scope chain. This is called going up the scope chain. Outer's like, yep, I've got Ryan, or name, it's Ryan, so you can have it. We're going to give it to you. Okay, that is a powerful programming concept. It allows us to write things and be dry, not repeating ourselves. It also allows us to keep track of closure, keep track of things that are inside of our function. It keeps track of, these namespace objects, variables, whatever you want to call them. So if we were to take this a step deeper and we were to actually do something fun and make this like really, intuitive or whatnot, let's just say we have an initializer function, and it itself is going to have a keyword, and that, or like a variable, and that variable we're just going to say is, we'll say language equals JavaScript. All right, and what I want to do is inside this function, I want to declare another function. These functions, you can declare multiple functions within themselves. And this function is going to just say, shout your lang, okay? And that function itself is just going to simply alert inside of here. It's going to alert the language, okay? Right here, we have provided closure, all right? You can see that my text editor is giving me a hint that this variable defined in here is a localized variable. It doesn't exist in the namespace. Right here, name is Ryan. It's set explicitly to the variable inside of here. So if I say name and I point at it, it's going to say, okay, Ryan never gets reassigned, but it's out here. I think we could just say const here. And wouldn't affect the thing. Const is just going to help us not keep track of assigning or reassigning our variables, okay? But inside of here, we've gone another level deep. It's like inception, right? So since we're not reassigning language, we're going to define it right here. And so you can see that our alert function is now pointing to language, okay? A shout your lang does not have a variable called language to its local lexical scope, but so it goes up the scope chain, okay? And so what it's going to do is hold on to a copy or a version of that and use it to to go for it. So if we call shout your lang from within, and we then initialize our function, oh, yeah. Alert is not defined because we're in, if we did this in the browser, okay. If we did this in the browser, it would work because there's an alert method on the, whoa. There's an alert method on the browser's JavaScript global window. There is no such thing as alert in Node. All right, so we were using Node by when we called this initialize function. So let's actually run this in the browser environment and see how it behaves a little bit differently than our other environment. So if I run that and I actually alert should go forth and conquer. Now you can thank the creators of Chrome for finally updating their alert box menu. It actually looks decent. So a round of applause for everyone over at Chrome. That happened only a few months ago. So you've jumped into web development as awesome software engineers learning JavaScript, and you have a beautiful, nice box shadow and a beautiful little well-placed button. It looks and feels like a modern alert box like it should have been all along. They hadn't updated that in years and years, so we're really excited about that, you can't tell. So that is as far as I wanted to go into Clojure. I can get you other examples of Clojure, but just know you're going to be using this idea that you need to hold on to variables, and then maybe in your homework you're going to be passing those variables to some kind of callback function, okay? Which we'll go over a review of callbacks in just a moment. All right, so now for the remainder of our advanced JavaScript lecture, I'm going to talk about the following two concepts. The first is going to be the class keyword and what it is doing and what it looks like and how to use it. And the second is going to be the use of callbacks, okay? And that's just going to be a review to your previous stuff that you've already gone through, but it's also going to help set you up on the right track for this next lab, okay? So the first thing that I mentioned was the class keyword. So first thing I want to do is I want to come up here and I actually want to grab some of my code, and we're going to be doing a little bit of refactoring to it. So I'm going to come down here and now paste it. So let me just comment this stuff out so we get out of all the console logs. So I'm going to now paste my code here, and we're going to refactor this, all right? So I mentioned that a constructor function is a function that we can use as sort of like a blueprint. It sort of sets up what our other functions, when we call new, we can basically build a new object. We can construct a new object with a constructor function. That's no different than what a class is doing, okay? Class person, okay, is now a new keyword that sort of throws a bone to anyone coming from a different classical object-oriented based language. So if you've landed in this course from the Java programming language, you've probably seen this keyword all over the place. Java uses a lot of object-oriented programming styles. A lot of people out there will argue that, well, object-oriented programming is dead. In JavaScript, we just have this class keyword, and it's just, basically all it is just a way to satisfy the masses. And while there is some truth to that, for me, I think it simplifies a lot of things for us. It allows us to sort of piggyback off of ideas from other languages, but there's going to be some gotchas. So if you are familiar with class and you're coming from Java, forget everything you know about class, all right? Because it is only using JavaScript constructor functions under the hood. It simply is syntactic sugar over our constructor functions of old. And by old, I mean 2 years ago, when we didn't have the class keyword in the JavaScript spec. So now that it's here, we can use it. It's seen all over the place, especially when using React. We're going to show you why it's really, really useful today. So the first thing you need to do when you define a class is do it with a constructor function. This is now going to be where your properties of your object that you will create later will be created. All right, and here we're going to just do a little syntax refining, cleaning up, and now it's no different, this constructor, than our previous use of person. So if I come down here now and I want to say const Ryan equals new person, I'm going to give that person options. Okay, the first option is going to be a first name of Ryan and the last name of Cameron. All right, and so now if I come down and I console.log out or Ryan, I don't want to assert, I just want to log. It is a person with the first and last name of Ryan. So if I come down here and say Ryan dot greet, hello, my name is Ryan Campbell. So this is no different than what you've been used to. But let's just say that our person is, okay, so let's make this a little bit more robust, all right? Let's say that, that we're talking on a different level of maybe species, or let's say like, dang, what do I want to say? Okay, so person will have a name, person will have an age, and then, but we want to say, because I'm trying to get to this, this principle of extending this object's properties and passing them down and passing things back up to them. Because that's something you're going to have to do in your lab, and it's something you're going to use with React when you get there all the time. So let me just think of an example real quick, and I'll get right back to you. Okay, so I think I've come up with a good idea for how I want to present this next piece. So let's say that we actually had a class, an object creator up here called class human. And that human is actually going to be our sort of our parent class. Human needs a constructor, and we're just going to give it a type that comes in. And then when we say, there's different types of humans, I guess, and we'll just say this.type equals type. And that's just going to be a string that we pass to human. All right. So now, if I go on and this works. So the type of human could just be like a person, right? This is such a contrived example. I actually really don't like this example, but we'll see what happens when we get further down the road. So now let's see what happens when we actually say that person itself extends out the human constructor. So what's interesting is right away you can see that this is not defined. And part of that is because we need to pass back up and connect our options that come in. Whoops. So now that we pass our options back in, by passing them back up to the human constructor, we should have an ability to say that person is, so Ryan is of type person, whose first name is Ryan and last name is Hamlin. And then you can see we've inherited two different things from Ryan, okay? And then nothing has changed here. We say, hello, my name is Ryan Hamlin, okay? And if you look at, and I will provide, if you look at the Mozilla specification for this, I'll provide a link, provide it in the show notes, as they say, to this resource. You can go and see how class constructors are built. So now, since we're extending human, we gain an access to those properties. So one thing I may want to do is actually just simply put this stuff up here to clean it up a little bit. Options is not defined. We're just going to say that since we're passing it, we're just going to say up here, options are going to come in, and we're going to say options.type, and pass those options back up when they get called, and then type's undefined because we didn't give it when we initially instantiated it. So type equals whatever we want to call it. So we can just say ourself explicitly, we can say human. So there we go, cleaned it up. But you can see that you can sort of build out what you want your other objects that get delegated these properties to with your original class construction, okay? And then extend that construction. And then when you call person, you can pass in options and push them up with super together. If you're going to extend an object, okay, you're going to need to use the super keyword, okay? And if this was just a get function, it simply would, so I would have to call it with get, or the keyword get somewhere. Let's see, Ryan.get. It's not a thing. I'd have to figure out exactly how to call this right away, which would be, let me remember how to do that real quick. So, yeah, I should just be able to call greet. But yeah, so I don't have to actually call it like this. So I can use this. It knows it's a getter. It's going to go and get it. And there are gets and sets that you can use. So if you're going to be needing it to retrieve some sort of information about your object that you're working with, so notice once again, person doesn't have those explicit keywords set as type, first name, and last name. But when we call it with the new keyword, then they get assigned down here because we're essentially, human is delegating its properties to person in this sense. All right? So when options comes in, it's going to be assigned the first and last name and everything in between and the type, right? And let's say that we also console, hello, my name is Ryan Hamblin, and I am this dot. So I could be of type whatever. So I could be a humanoid, or I could be of type, I don't know, extraterrestrial. You'll never know. You'll never know. Let's just go for human right now, and that's all you need to know about me. I'm a human whose name is Ryan and Hamlin. Okay? And then once again, I use the get, which you're going to be needing for later on in the course. You're going to be needing that getter. Very important piece. Okay. Okay, now I'm going to review this idea of callbacks. Okay, so we've already dealt with this before through the basic JavaScript lab. In this lab, you're going to be doing a lot of callbacks. Okay, so a callback is simply giving a function to another function that can be called at a certain place in time. Okay, so let's say we have, let's just say we have a function called, I love examples. We'll have it called, say, hello, since we're so original here. Okay, and that function is going to just be a lambda function, and it itself is going to take two parameters. First parameter is going to be name as a string, and then a call back. Okay, so let's say that we're actually going to say this is our greet function. All right. So when the string comes in as name, we want to pass it back to a callback and do something like that. So that when we call greet, we can play around with how we want to change the data. Okay. So in this sense, all we need to do is simply call back the name. Okay. So we're going to give the name that comes into this function back to wherever the function is executed, which is going to be down here. When we call greet, we're going to say Ryan, and we're going to say is a lambda function as the second argument, and that argument is going to print, since we're calling back with the name, we have a new name coming in. We'll just call it, we'll just call it specify name, or I hate that word. Let's call it new name instance. That's terrible. We'll just call it name. And then this function is where we actually do something with that new name. we can say greet gets called with Ryan, and it says, Mr. Robot, console.log, the phrase, hello, comma, new name. And you can see right away that we have access to what is given to our callback, okay? So this is a very trivial, small example of a callback function, all right? One thing that's interesting to note is that I defined greet up here, okay? I passed it a string, I passed it a callback, and then I simply called that function that I'm going to be giving to this function, which is defined right here. This is our argument that becomes our callback. So this is our callback function. It's a callback to a function that is named somewhere else, which then gets called. So because we supplied this function here with those parameters, this function callback gets called at this place in time. And we're just giving it, we're piping name into it and then giving the new name to it, and that's kind of how it's all working. This is kind of a weird example, but let me draw it out for you and show you kind of what's going on with this. So first and foremost, Ryan gets fed up here and becomes name. Okay. Right, now we call our callback function, which is defined here. Remember, this word callback is a placeholder word. It's just a parameter. It doesn't mean anything yet. But when we call it like a function, JavaScript is expecting it to be a function at the time that this line executes on line 97. Okay? So we call callback and we give it the name, which is pointing to Ryan. All right? And now we can say that whatever comes in when this callback gets called, whatever comes in, it's going to be attached to new name. And that in and of itself is going to be now pointed through this loop of Ryan. So you can see how it comes up here, it's bound here, and then it's bound back to this string Ryan. So by the time that we console log something out, it's going to be defined as Ryan here. All right. What does that mean? What does that give us? Well, a lot of you have already looked ahead, or you're just right where you're at, or you've seen that we've used, and we saw this in our code challenge today, this idea of using for each. Okay, so for each is a function. All right, it's bound to the global JavaScript array object, the array prototype. Okay. So when we execute for each, it's going to call for every single iteration. It's going to call out, and I'm going to actually do these as strings so that you can see the point a little bit more dialed in. Okay, so it's going to simply loop over from start to finish this array of strings. All right. And then for every single string, it's going to look at every single element. Okay, so it's going to look at every single element, and it's going to be able to give you back one of two things. The first thing is going to give you the element itself, 1. And the second thing it can give you is that element's index, which is the number 0, because our arrays in JavaScript are 0-based index arrays. So there are indices of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 here. All right? What does that do? What is the point of describing what for each does? Well, you can see right here that for each is built using a callback, a function that you can do something with. So this in and of itself is now where you're supplying an argument that is an anonymous function to our for each function itself. And that callback takes multiple parameters. So first off, it'll take that element, and then it can take the index where it's defined. All right? So as we move through this array, the first thing that we can print out is the element and its index. I need to spell things properly. That's a real problem for me. And I also need to actually finish my console log method. So now you can see that we get sort of a tracking of every single element in this object and where they're defined. And we can do things with this element. So this element is the string 1, and it's defined at index 0. Okay? So I can get more specific with this and say console.log element, and then the element itself. Is defined at, I guess I should say is held at index, pass it, le index. So now if we print this out, you can see a nice user-friendly way to say element 1 is held at 0. So now we can do some fun things with this stuff. So if you know, you can do everything with this. The same thing you can do with the for loop, but you have less control over the specific loop. So if I say that if element, if type of element triple equals string, and I actually, once again, spelling, type of is a reserved keyword that checks the type of the given parameter. Parameter given is element here. This is a type of element. If it is explicitly equal to a string, then I want to then console.log where that element is found. So I'm going to turn a couple of these back into numbers. We'll just go 4, and we'll go 3, and then, yeah, that's fine. So now if we look at our console log, we're only logging out element 1 is held at 0, and it's of type string because we are passing this check. If I wanted to, I could do an else statement here and just say any other type of element, you know, console log that one, and we'll just put on the end of this and is of type and is not string. And here and is of type string. So pretty cool way to go about. So it's held at index 0 and is of type string. And then same thing here. Okay, now it's not string. Cool. That is an example of a callback. Why this is powerful is because it allows you to design under the hood of your functions a reusable block of code that you can execute anywhere within your application in different contexts. So if I wanted to do the same thing, if I wanted to maybe assign this array to my array, and it's not defined, now it's going to work as long as I spell properly. So it should go and do exactly what it's planned to do. So now I can take my array, and because for each is given to me, I can use it over and over again. So for each, every single element in the array and its index that we're concerned with, we're going to log y'all out. We'll do something cool with you. So now I can say, we'll create a new array here. So const new, I don't want to do that. I'll put it in here, yeah. So what I'll do is I'll say const new array. Okay, and then for every single element that isn't a string, so let's say this, for every single element that is not a string, okay, and we actually don't need the index of this one, we're going to say new array dot push elements, and then we're going to console.log that new array. So it's going to iterate and push the new element in this circle. Let's call it log after the iteration. So you can see the only two things that we have up here aren't strings. This is saying anything that's not a string, push it in, you get a brand new array. So you can see how it's powerful to use for each over and over again. Now, these are kind of contrived examples. They're not like super awesome. They're just like little examples to help you understand these concepts at a different level. All right. Okay, so that is all that I had to cover for this topic today. Now, you're going to be working on a mini sprint where you're going to have to recreate a lot of these things, and then we're gonna meet back after the mini sprint and go over a solution to those problems, and then move into the advanced JavaScript.